welcome to our channel.
Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on every single platform that you are on. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all those. You can also find us there and follow us.
Yeah, so today we are going to be delving into Versus, which is an anthology by Huza Press publishers in Rwanda. So it was published in 2015. It's a collection of short stories by Rwandan authors for the Rwandan landscape in general.
The stories were got from the Huza Press Prize for fiction. Wow, that was long. Yeah. There are 10 stories. They were all shortlisted for the prize. Yeah.
And the ones that won were Versus, obviously, no, and the Exit of Fear and Guilt.
Yeah.
Which you can find in here when you get yourself a copy if you haven't already.
Yeah. So guys, what did you feel when you put down this book? What was rushing through you?
Rushing?
Or yeah, it might.
I don't think there was anything
slowly floating.
There was nothing rushing, because rushing makes it sound like
in you.
In me,
Nothing rushing in you.
I just think for me, when I got this book, I was really excited to read it because I had never read a book like when you read the blurb and things about it, they talk about Rwanda having one story. So I was very excited to read a book by Rwandan writers that was not about the genocide, that was about just normal people living in Rwanda and normal things. I was a bit disappointed when I put it down, I have to say. It wasn't as exciting as I thought it would be. I didn't get that thing you feel when you read a book that touches you. I guess that's what I felt when I put it down.
Well, personally, the blurb says these are authentic Rwandan stories told by Rwandans. And I remember when I picked up the book, I was really excited. I mean, it was a bit hard to go through it, but then when I actually allowed myself to open my mind to creating these different worlds, I enjoyed the first story, for example. I enjoyed a couple of more other stories in there. By the time I got to the end, I was a bit tired because there were some stories that were, I guess also it was the content of the stories. I mean, for example, there's No Man's Land, which talks about witches hanging. And I was just like, what is this? And in fact, with that one, I couldn't go all the way to the end of the story. But when I picked it up, I felt like I enjoyed the simple stories. So, for example, the one about the little red cat, the Gusaba, I really enjoyed that one because it was so simple and it was so normal. And, it was just a simple story that was told. And that was it, for the enjoyment. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And you, Essie?
I don't know where to start with this book. I think, okay, for me, number one is I struggled. I read this book like twice. I started it, read a couple of stories, and then put it down for a while, then picked it up again. I think when I put it down, there was a lot going through. Okay, let me talk about the stories that I liked. So there was, for me, the first story and No Man's Land were two stories that I really liked. I think because they brought in the aspect of Afrofuturism and there was this whole, I felt like these people were really helping us imagine a whole different world. So I appreciated that creativity and all of this. There were a lot of them that were really hard to get through for me. They took a while. Like the last story for me was particularly kind of just hard to read and process. A lot of them also had just like unnecessary big words in some places, but yeah.
So Karen, Esther, you said Mpanga, the first story, was your favorite story. Can you tell us what Mpanga was about?
Esther, do you want to go first?
What
as
it was
you
about.
saw it as a...
Okay, so Mpanga is... So it was a hard story to read. It really was, because you have to create the world. So it's about this... Does Mpanga mean twin? I'm so sorry to first interrupt. Does it mean... okay, I don't know. Yeah, I think Mpanga means twin in Rwanda. I don't know.
I know it doesn't mean twin. I know what.
Right.
It's not
Okay.
What does it
At least I know it doesn't mean friend.
It means something.
Guys.
Okay, so it is about
I don't know.
this world that is formed after there has been a war. Like it's a central... I hope I'm going to get some of these definitions right. But yeah, there's this whole, it's like little towns existing with a central leader and a central kind of sense of government. And then surrounding this world, there's another world that exists. And there's
sort
a wall.
It's sort of the idea of alternative worlds. Like the idea that when you die, you go into a sort of
an alternative
world. So the ones outside were dead?
It's more like they
so
don't use the word dead. They use, it's like as if so this was my understanding of that story. It was kind of the idea of two different souls. Like you as Esther, but there's Esther
in the other world.
There's another Esther in another world.
Yeah.
So it was more like in this sort of world you were able to at some point meet your other Esther.
Okay.
If that makes any sense. So yes, basically you had a twin soul. But it wasn't, I don't think it was more like, what had you said? Yeah, twins. They weren't literal twins. It was like the idea of incarnation. Like you can come back to life in another form, but in this world, your incarnated self exists.
But also in the beginning, it says before they completely closed everything off, you could cross over.
Yes,
you were able to cross over.
That's why I feel like they are not because you guys said something about them being two different souls, but like of the same person. But then if you could cross over, anyway, I guess it's really up to interpretation. Yeah.
No. So what happened was the reason why the portal was closed was because one soul killed another soul on the other side.
Yeah.
So then they closed it off, and that's why the central government would go around to the different towns or cities or whatever and install an heir who was informed of the processes of that portal, and basically ensuring that people don't do that crossover thing or talking to each other. And that's why it was so intentional that the central government was involved in the succession in all the other,
because it was supposed to be like peaceful. Like when I'm tired of this world and when I'm old, I go into that other world and meet my. But now people, to live longer, which is the idea that everybody wants, mortality, people had started killing.
The other one.
Yeah.
So for me, when I was reading, I actually understood it to be a relationship of twins. For me, like especially because Nia, in the beginning, goes and she sees the connection that she has with this other person that looks exactly like her is so intricate. Like they're so connected. She feels so hurt that she can't talk to her and engage with her and all of these things. So for me, I really understood it to be sort of a twin relationship more than even two souls, kind of. Yeah.
The time when I watched it was around the time when I read it was around the time when I just watched Black Panther. So even in creating the worlds, the two worlds, I was drawing a lot of inspiration or information from what I had seen in Black Panther and kind of just projecting that, which enabled me to create the world. Because in the beginning I was like, what is
going on? Yeah, that's true.
That's true. Why are they, But I think that added to an interesting element to the story because it's not something that you can see here.
Yeah.
I think for me, it reminded me of Atlantis. I don't know whether you guys have watched Atlantis. It's an animation.
No.
Okay, I watched it when I was a kid, like a long time ago. But it had the same
idea,
the same type of the same idea, and also that blue. You know how they talked a lot about the blue streams flowing and sparkling. Atlantis had a lot of blue and turquoise, and it was this whole other world that was
and for me, I think those are the things that I liked about Impanga. It created, like you said, from Black Panther, but also like I really like stories that are fictional about Africa, but make Africa seem like this place of, abundance, because the world is beautiful and run by themselves, and there's no outside interference, and it's this uncolonized, beautiful place that, they were happy and they ruled themselves, and they talk about it as this peaceful. There were people who did this and people who did that, and there was sort of a system, and there was no lack, and there was no need for anything more than just your family and the people. And I think that was what I enjoyed the most. I feel like for me now, what I struggled with was the whole fiction bit of it and the other soul, and what I feel like the writer could have, I think at certain points in the writing should have, I think, brought it out better in a certain way to make it more, if you read fiction of different worlds like Harry Potter, there's a way that they make them they try to explain it to you so that for you, as you create this world in your brain and you're reading, you're able to like understand it from your own world. You know, like in Harry Potter, they create a boarding school that if you can understand school and what. But I think for the way it was written, maybe that's why I think for me, Mpanga would be the story I'd want to read as a book and not a short story. I think it would be a bit harder as a short story, because I think there's more you have to put in, and if you have a word count to follow, I think it's a bit hard. But I think I would like to read it as a book.
At the same time, we can't take away from the fact that these are budding writers, and it's a bit of a stretch to compare Mpanga to Harry Potter, for example.
Yeah,
because
I get
Harry
that.
Potter was obviously written
by someone who was
so like it was a lot of work invested into it, and even if you read J.K. Rowling's background, I mean, the mere point of her getting to J.K. Rowling, she had to change, she had to become a pseudonym. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think, as a budding writer, especially the author of the Mpanga story, I think it was okay. It was okay. Yeah, it was a good job. It was a job well done. If you allowed yourself to, without the comparisons, forgetting about all the other fiction stories you've read, forgetting about all the other worlds that have been created for you, and you just allow yourself to go with that story and immerse yourself and just create that world without comparing it to anything. It was a job well done.
No, I loved it. It was my favorite story. It was the story that I personally would have picked to win. It was honestly. It was a really, really good story.
We've talked about a story that we all seem to have liked. So what story would you say you didn't really like?
Kara, do you want to go first?
Well, I didn't particularly enjoy No Man's Land. It was just difficult for me to work through. Not necessarily because of the story. It's not necessarily because of the way the story was written, but because we had witches hanging somewhere in the beginning, and I was like,
Zero.
What?
I'm out.
What? Like, after that point, everything that came after, I kept on having to go back to, but there's a witch hanging. Like, what is this? It was so dark, actually. It was so dark for me. It wasn't my kind of story.
Okay.
I mean, I read a few dark stories, but that one was just on the
plus.
end of the spectrum.
Okay.
I think I had two, but I'll talk about one. I had two stories that I found very difficult, but I'll talk about one just because maybe as a woman, I think it could have been written better in the idea of, sexual harassment. The story about the two sisters, the one sister the exit of fear and guilt.
Yeah.
And I know they won, so this is going to sound so bad. But
Buiza and Mutesi?
Yes, the two sisters, Buiza and Mutesi, and one sister being, the one who just wants to go through life from her beauty and is having sort of a relationship with her boss, and then gets her sister a job in this same office. Her sister who, went abroad to study and all these things and has all these dreams and hopes, and then this boss of hers starts hitting on her. I felt like it was written, I just didn't think it was I really don't think that's how it happens. Like that whole sexual harassment scene with the boss and then the girl and then the sister in the room. I felt like the characters were not believable for me. Buiza and Mutesi, they really weren't. I felt like there was a story, but maybe for me, because the characters were not developed, and that is such a story based on those people, I was very disappointed when I finished it. I think.
But why is it that the characters were not believable?
I think especially those scenes of where she's standing and then this man is touching her. I was like, because they explain her as this, powerful, crazy, sort of girl, and she's.
But that could be accurate. That could actually be accurate.
I think
sometimes some of these situations actually paralyze you, and you're unable, like you don't even know how.
That's not how it came off. It didn't come off as she was paralyzed from what he was doing, so she couldn't react. It just came up as, I don't know.
When I read it, I thought she was scared and she was paralyzed in fear, because she's like, so what am I supposed to do? I want the job. My sister is the secretary. Like, she's right there.
Also, the relationship between the sisters wasn't very... how should I say it? Anyway, let me just say, I read this book. I read that was the story that took me the longest to finish. Imagine.
So between this one,
it was,
and there's the Exit of Fear and Guilt, and there's the, what's that story?
the very last story.
No, not the very last story. It's I Leave You Today.
Mm-hmm.
So between that one and
I Leave You Today.
Today.
Oh, the
I
domestic
Leave You
violence
Today
one,
is
yeah.
the domestic violence story. I think
Yeah.
for me, I think when we start to talk about that I Leave You Today book story, the first time I read it, I also felt what Esther felt when she talks about it and says it, for her it feels a little Americanized, a little TV-ized. But I also thought when I read it that maybe, for me, they are, because she says they over made the guy a monster. But the truth is, they are people who are just evil. Like, they are people who are as bad as her husband in that story in real life. So I don't think I struggled with it as much as I did with Fear of X.
You know, the funny thing is when I read, not funny, it's not funny, but when I read I Leave You Today, it was hard to get through because of the content, because of the way it was written. It's like you're constantly running. So I felt like I was running, I was hiding, I was beaten, I was everything she was feeling, I was feeling.
Okay.
But you see,
And
now
that
that for
of
me,
relation.
that was my biggest problem with that story. A lot of stories about sexual harassment or about, domestic violence, those kinds of stories usually tug at my heart. Like, I usually feel like they're so heavy, and I finish those stories and feel pain. I didn't feel that. I didn't fear that. Fear of exit and the exit part. I didn't feel, I can't say I didn't feel sorry for her, because that would make me just sound horrible. But it didn't tug at me. I just felt like it was like an essay. You get, like, it wasn't,
It felt more of like an not academic per se, but after school special, because there's
yes,
no other way to say that thing.
It felt like an after
school special. I think
it felt like when they
it
give
felt like they wrote down what they want to, like they said, I want to write a story, and I wanted to have rape, and I wanted to have it was not a story that was born.
There were
itself.
no, like how when you write a story, then we sit with an editor and they're like, make me feel something. That's what I would have told her when she was writing it. I'd have said, this is a good story, but you need to make the reader feel. I didn't feel.
Is it possible that the title of the story oversold the content?
No, because you know what's so funny? I learned a very long time ago not to judge a book by its title, so I didn't. Also, a lot of the titles in this book don't make sense to me in comparison to the actual story. So I didn't really. No, it wasn't that. It was really also maybe because around this past year with the whole Me Too and all these things, there's been a lot of stories that I've been reading about sexual harassment and rape and domestic violence. All that stuff has been really on this past year. So maybe that's also another thing I was expecting. Yeah, maybe I'm blinded by other stories. But I didn't feel
anyway, me, I kind of liked the story, The Exit of Fear and Guilt. I liked it because it was simply that. It was just, I've come back, I want a job, my sister has hooked me up, I'm in this company, this guy is funny, as in like, in other situations, I'll be,
like,
but here I am, and
I'm at a loss.
You know what I mean? And then the sister gets angry.
Because this guy. But then another thing is Mutesi's anger. You guys, I remember reading this story, and Mutesi's anger perturbed me because it was more jealousy. Yeah, it was more about jealousy than her sister.
But that one I can
but she
talk about. She explains it because also in the beginning, Buiza talks about how they don't really have a relationship. Like, they're not very close. They're not sister. Do you get? They're not friends like that. So of course, they explain her as such a narcissist that of course the first thing that enters her head when she finds out is that, oh my god, me the beautiful one, because in her head her sister with her natural hair and her Africanistic vibes is not beautiful. So how can this man want her when I've given him everything?
I really don't think that she, what's her name, Mutesi, was necessarily being jealous, as in, how can this guy see my sister with all her nappy hair and also be hitting on her? I don't think that was the case. I think the case was, this guy is actually disrespectful. We had a thing, but how is he going after my sister? As in, for me, it felt like she was being more protective.
That anger, that anger was, it came because first of all, she walked into the office, right? Yeah. She enters the office and she's coming in to seduce him, knowing that he has, I think at this point she already knew that her sister has been to her. But she doesn't enter all guns blazing. Then when he tells her, no, I want to be with your sister or something like this.
No, he said something like,
give me your sister. I want
Something,
her also.
and then that's where her anger came from. It was
And
like,
she
it felt more like...
Yeah, it wasn't, because for me, I feel like if it had been about, like, this guy's disrespectful, when she walked into that office, she would have blown him from the start.
But
that's exactly what I also thought.
She was like, let me go and
she didn't come in
remind
guns
him,
blazing.
you know, that this, I'm here, I'm present.
He didn't need anything else. Then when he said, Babi, I need other things, that's when... Because I feel like that anger would have also been there.
I want your sister also. Not his comment of...
But you think that when they were having their thing, Mutesi and her boss, do you think that she thought she was the only one? Because even in the story they say, all the chicks in the office.
Then it wouldn't have hurt her that he wanted her sister based on the fact, because she knew literally, if you're taking your sister to work for a man who you know is like that, then you expect him to do it.
Try.
But I think what hurt her,
thinking this
0%.
yes, and
which is what we're saying though.
Which is
like,
what we're saying. For her in her head, she was like, my sister with her nappy hair and her
0. Like, what do you want?
But when he actually goes through with it, she gets angry because she's like, this
I feel like I want to look for the chapters because I remember reading, and you can. There were certain ways in the way she was behaving that really showed that this chick, it's legitimately just jealous. It's not even protection of her little sister. Anyway, I don't know, but this is what crossed my mind.
Talk about your story.
So for me, the story now it has a long name, you guys. Like, bear with me. Let me.
No Man's Land.
No Man's Land. I liked.
I know.
Okay, should I talk a bit about No Man's Land?
Oh,
I feel like okay,
no,
let me just
no,
justify my story for like 2
this
sentences, just 2 lines. You guys, No Man's Land, for me, it was a really good. It was dark. That's what I give it. It was a really dark story, but I like how creatively he built his world. For me, it blew me away. Like, I love stories like MEiREAD, Divergent, Hunger Games. They build this whole other world, and you just immerse yourself in it.
And then they take you somewhere.
Yo, like, it's...
Yeah.
So much of it. I mean, it was a short story, friends. Like, he could only do so much with a short story. But anyway, for me, I really like the world that he built. It was hard work to build it in my head, but when I did, I loved what I was.
Okay, the story you didn't like.
All right, so the story that I did not like. Let me just get to the contents.
It's the last story, Noah.
Yes. No Nuwo Nisamye Nasandai. I've said this so badly, you guys. Please excuse me. I feel like I've butchered the language. But yeah, I think for me, that story was my least favorite because I think for me it was mostly an editing thing. I feel like the person who wrote, he had a story. He had a story that he needed to get out there. But it was an editing thing. Like, there were just so much.
No, but me, I remember I defended it with a thing of maybe it was a translation issue.
But then, you know, they're only starting to accept submissions in Chinyarwanda and in French. So all the submissions from this first one were in English.
So maybe the person who wrote it, English is not their first language, maybe it's second language. So it was a bit difficult. So I think for me, that's why I would defend it. But I also struggled with this story, to be honest. To finish it was hard. It was like, let me finish that book. But anyway, please tell us what the story was about, so that maybe from there we can...
Yeah. So the story is written by... Okay, so there's this guy who has 2 voices in his head. It seems like a play on multiple personality disorder, but I don't know whether that's the way multiple personality disorder manifests itself. But yeah, so he has 2 voices in his head. And he's a regular guy. I think he's, in university. He goes to class. He has problems with his parents. He doesn't seem to have too many friends. His parents are divorced. And his mom is a crack addict who is like living with her. Yes, exactly. She's married to a fellow crack addict. And in the end, he killed himself. But it seems to be as a result of... He seems to kill himself, but it seems to be as a result... Carol, let me just finish. All right.
How are you describing?
So I think he kills himself because there's a lot of creative liberties that she takes with the story. He takes, I beg your pardon. But yeah, so in the end, he seems to kill himself, and it seems to be because he wanted to have sex. He was a virgin, and he wanted to have sex with his girlfriend.
That was not the problem.
Okay, let me finish. Yeah. So, because he had not talked about suicide until this point in the story. Suicide wasn't something that, unless I missed it, I don't know. But yeah, so it comes up at the end, and it's after he visits his girlfriend and is expecting to get some, but it turns out that she's in that time of the month. So, friend goes home, and next thing we know, I think he's drunk, and he's in an ambulance, and then he dies. So, I don't know, I think, for me, the story was a bit, maybe I just didn't understand what was happening, in all honesty. I think maybe there were a lot of structure edits, in my opinion, that might have biased me against the actual flow of the story. But yes.
So first of all, I don't think because his chick refused to give him some, is that why he killed himself? I really don't think so.
I really don't. When I was reading that story and I reread it,
because you didn't mention
that's kind of how
that the flow of events was like this.
Because I think that there were other things that happened where he could have been like, okay, now
I'm ready.
But it's that thing.
But then you remember they didn't. He tried cocaine. He went to the hospital. Even was happy. You remember with his parents. They talked and what. Then when he goes home, that's when he remembers. First of all, he remembers he's a virgin, like at the end of the story. But
Essie, contextualize the story. This is a guy who is at college. By the way, he's at college. He's at university. Yes. Yes. And because he wakes up every day at wits with himself, like he's at a battle with himself every single day, with everything that he's going through. On top of that, this voice keeps telling him, sip some Jack Daniel when he takes
because he took 3 sips and blacked out.
No, but what makes you defend him? What if he's a lightweight?
Exactly. The point is, also, how big is a sip?
Dushiime really wanted everything.
How big is a sip?
Okay, that was not even a problem. Yeah, it's
this voice is leading him to alcoholism, which is one thing.
3 sips is alcoholism.
No,
I beg leave your friends. Have said lightweight. You can't see Let me tell you,
Like he's struggling with himself. He's struggling with himself.
He is.
On top of that, when he takes the cocaine, by the way, it's because that voice in his head is like, no, let's try.
No. The voice in his head was telling him, don't do it. Because the other voice was the voice of reason, you guys. He was the one who just had this thing of, no, I want to do what I want to do. Like,
so why is this multiple? Why is it the voice in his head? Why did you take it as multiple personality? Couldn't it just be his conscience, just trying to make him?
I genuinely think he was depressed. I think he was depressed.
Yeah, I think so.
Also, given the fact that
the
writer created that environment of his parents are divorced. Divorce does things to
a child,
to the children.
That's true.
So if you take that into consideration, you take the fact that he's drinking on like the daily, no matter how many sips they are, you guys put them
it's a lot to finish the thing.
It's the thing. The fact that when he talks about how sometimes it's hard for him to get out of his room. And he has everything that he needs in his room. It's telling you that this kid is depressed. And then the reason when he kills himself, it's not necessarily because his chick said, no, I'm not giving you some.
So but that's the icing on the cake, like a cherry on top.
You think he killed himself then because this was the one thing he wanted, and then after this whole process of many things, this was the last straw.
Yes.
Which still makes it
in as much as it might seem
the last
so
anyway, I think so. And yeah, I honestly, not even, and that's why I started by saying I really feel like this person, he had a story. Like his story was there. I feel like there were just a lot of structure. And there were ways in which it could be
most
smoother.
of the stories in this book were the concepts were really
there.
I think for me, if I was to say something about this anthology that I liked, was the stories were very diverse. I mean, you go from Mpanga, which is a really fiction sci-fi kind of story, to just like a sweet little story about the Gusava, the little red car, and it's very simple and very sweet. And then you go to, Exit of What, which is about sexual harassment. Then I Leave You.
Oh, I'm not talking about the girl, you guys.
Oh my God, the story about the girl, which I also.
It's called Girl.
Oh,
yeah. So if you want to find out about all the stories we've been talking about, go out and get this book, Verses. It's really an interesting read, because I guess everyone has different opinions about the stories in the book. We would like to hear what you think about the different stories. What was your favorite story? So please leave a comment, like, share, subscribe. See you next time.
Bye.